Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Now, there's a shift here in language that's lost in translation from Greek to English. In verse 15, the you is singular, meaning the practice that we just read about is not so much for the church as a whole or the kind of elder team of the church or whatever. It's for you. And it's for me as a follower of Jesus to do on each other. All followers of Jesus, not just the elders of a church, have a responsibility to go after each other. But in verse 18, the you goes back to plural, which is more normal for Jesus. Now it's all about the church as a whole. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, meaning we function as the locus point of authority of heaven on earth. We covered the language of binding and loosing back in chapter 16, if you were here. Felt like forever ago. It was used by the rabbis in Jesus' day to convict or acquit someone in a Jewish court of law. Jesus is saying, when you as the church call a behavior sin, that's not right. That's not the way of Jesus. It's not so much that you wield the spiritual power of heaven behind you at all. It's more that it will have already been ratified, so to speak, in heaven's court. Because again, the church is the place where God's will is done on earth as in heaven. It is the repository. It's the best way to think about authority. It is the repository of the cumulative wisdom from the mind of God through the writings of the scriptures and the way of Jesus over thousands of years. Clarification 1, when you confront sin, you have, at a sense, God with you. Clarification 2, verse 19. Again, truly I tell you, remember that's like Jesus' little idiom, he's driving the point home, that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, now remember in context, this is not prosperity gospel. He's not saying together, agree for the new Land Rover or whatever. He's saying in context, he's teaching on dealing with sin in the community, right? And the healing of somebody who's lost. It will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am with him. Okay, this is subversive to the core, and again, lost in translation. There was a well-known rabbinic saying from right around the time of Jesus that was, quote, if 2 sit together and the words of the Torah are between them, the divine presence rests between them. This is the age of the synagogue, right? If you sit down for a Torah study or a Bible study with your best mate or whatever, the divine presence that was in the temple, in a sense, it's with you. Here Jesus is saying, I am the divine presence. I am God with you. And I'm with you not just when you sit down for a Torah study or a Bible study, as great as that is. I'm with you in the mess of community. When you sin against each other, when you are hurt, when there's ache, when there's misunderstanding, when there's abuse inside, I'm with you in the mess. Jesus is not an idealist. I think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer's famous line from Life Together, where he defined community in the way of Jesus as a community of apprentices under the word, meaning under the scripture, but more than that, under God's will. He said, quote, he who loves the dream of community more than the community itself becomes a destroyer of the latter. He who loves the idea, the idealized kind of vision and dream of church more than the church he or she is a part of becomes the destroyer of the latter. Jesus' vision of church is not utopian. There's a lot of that in the world right now. Jesus' vision of life together with people who still have sin in their DNA is grounded in reality. He is fierce in his pro-church heart, but he is anti-idealism because where there is idealism, there isn't love. This is the cause we're one teaching away from what Jesus has to say about marriage and divorce. And it's all one flow of thought. This is the cause, the culprit behind so much divorce or just breakdown at a relational level in marriage, because often we don't marry a man or a woman, we marry an idea or an ideal. We fall in love with, in Jungian psychology, he would say, the feminine archetype or the masculine archetype. And it's just all well and good, but there's a lot of narcissism in that. And then a few months into our marriage or a few years into our marriage, we wake up one morning and we look over and the hair is all crazy and we realize, oh, wow, she's wonderful, but she's not the feminine archetype. She's her. And she looks at you and says, oh, wow, you're not the masculine archetype. You're John Mark. And wow, okay. And then at that point, you have an opportunity to move from narcissism to love, to agape, where we take people and we love people as they actually are, as they actually come to us. And this is a lifelong journey. My wife and I are nearing 20 years together, and every day it's another step forward to love not the idea of marriage or the idea of family or the idea of romance or sexuality or whatever, or a soulmate, but the reality of my wife who's fearfully, wonderfully made, of my children, of the people I'm in community with, of you, of our church, which has all sorts of problems and issues. You think I'm not aware of it? I'm very aware of it. To love people as they are, to let God love us as we are, to love the church as it is, not necessarily as it should be. Now, this teaching of Jesus is one of his most used and abused. All sorts of damage. Let's just be honest for a moment. Well, not for a moment, for the whole time, but all sorts of damage has been done when people have turned it into a formula for, quote, church discipline, and it's not even great language, and often done the right thing, but the wrong way, or in the wrong spirit, in a spirit of moral superiority, or kind of shaming, or some kind of a personal grievance, or kind of a church politics thing. It's ugly. People have been left devastated by Matthew 18 done bad. But I would argue even more people have been hurt and left with a wound by Matthew 18 not done at all. By being left to stumble, to fall into sin, or even away from the faith with nothing but a polite wave, goodbye, or a text, love you. If on one side of the spectrum you have cruelty, and we hear horror story after horror story, right, of just Matthew 18 gone bad, on the other side, you have compromise, where people compromise on sin in a community because they do not want to rock the boat or upset the touchy person or deal with their own sin, because to confront